Hi, I'm Amy. Nice to meet you. Before I tell you my story, kindly hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I like to know where you're from. Now let's dive in. I still remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't invited. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in the middle of replying to emails when a glossy postcard slid under my office door. I thought it was for me, my name on the envelope, maybe. But no, it was for the tenant down the hall, a wine importer. The card had a bold gold border and in sleek lettering, Mathew Carter Presents, grand opening of Cartera, the culinary experience of the decade. The date? 2 weeks away. The location? The corner of 5th and Main, the same property I had helped him lease 3 years ago, draining my savings and maxing my credit card. I stared at the card, my chest tightening. There was Mathew in the picture, holding a glass of champagne, smiling like he'd just conquered the world. I didn't recognize the woman standing beside him, arm linked through his, some PR rep, maybe. Definitely not me. For 10 years, I'd been his unpaid investor, bookkeeper, therapist, and cheerleader. I'd worked double shifts at my marketing job so he could focus fully on his art. I'd learned the language of seasonal produce and food plating, just to keep up with his rants about mediocre palates. I'd believed him when he said, "We're building this together." But apparently we didn't include me anymore. That evening, I came home to find him at the kitchen counter, slicing basil like he was auditioning for a cooking show. The air smelled like garlic and betrayal. "You're home early," he said without looking up. I dropped my bag and took a seat. "Got something you want to tell me?" He gave me this fake innocent smile. "About what?" "The grand opening. The invitations." He paused, knife hovering midair. "Oh, yeah. It's more of an industry thing. Media, critics, investors. I'm your wife, Mathew." My voice was steady, but my hands were gripping the chair so hard my knuckles hurt. "It's just, I don't want you to feel pressured to be there. You've been so busy with work." That was his way of saying you don't fit the image anymore. I could see it in his eyes. This was his stage, and I'd become backstage clutter. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I said, "Right. Wouldn't want to ruin the photo ops." He went back to chopping, dismissing me with the rhythm of his knife against the board. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I'd been sidelined, erased from a decade of sacrifice. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My brain kept replaying every unpaid bill I'd covered, every catering gig I'd worked when his concept couldn't pay rent. The resentment was thick enough to choke me. And then I remembered Andy Brady. Andy had been a client back when I worked in PR for local restaurants. Nervous, jittery, but good-hearted. I'd once helped him out of a scandal involving an overzealous food blogger who accused him of corruption. I'd spun the story, shielded his reputation, and in return he'd said, "Amy, if you ever need a favor, anything, you call me." That was 7 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since. But the thought of Mathew toasting his success, while I stood outside looking in, made my skin crawl. I didn't know what I wanted yet, revenge maybe. Or just acknowledgement that I'd mattered. I rolled over, picked up my phone, and scrolled until I found Andy's old number. My thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet. First, I needed to see just how far Mathew had erased me. And for that, I'd have to go digging, quietly. The next morning, I woke up before Mathew and slipped out of bed without making a sound. His phone was on the nightstand, face down. I didn't touch it yet. Instead, I went for the laptop he kept in his office, the one he swore was just for menu design and invoices. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I was confirming. The desktop was cluttered with files, Cartera / guest list, Pivotal Sex, VIP / seating chart to PDF *, sponsor contracts.docs. My pulse quickened as I opened the guest list. There it was in neat black font. Local politicians, celebrity chefs, food critics, influencers with more followers than sense. And investors. So many investors. People whose checks had clearly replaced my years of sweat equity. But what really made my stomach drop was the notes column next to some of the names. Priority photographer coverage. Avoid mention of prior financial backers. Sensitive to ingredient sourcing questions. Avoid mention of prior financial backers. That meant me. It was like seeing my name on a gravestone, except the gravestone didn't even have my name. I closed the file before I could start shaking. The next click brought me to an email thread between Mathew and a supplier. They were discussing premium imported truffle essence and enhanced shelf life for signature sauces. My marketing brain flagged it instantly. Preservatives. The kind the FDA side-eyes, the kind that could ruin his brand if the wrong person caught wind. I leaned back in his chair. Preservatives weren't illegal if properly disclosed, but for a man who preached farm-to-table authenticity like scripture, it would be catastrophic PR. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly exited the files, pulling up a random stock photo on the screen as Mathew entered. "You're up early," he said, tying his apron. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Just checking some work stuff." He gave me a distracted nod and kissed my forehead like I was a pet dog before heading out. When the door closed, I exhaled. My hands were ice cold. This wasn't just a matter of being uninvited. He had rewritten history, replaced me, and now he was cutting corners in ways that could destroy people's trust. By lunch, I had decided I was calling Andy. I found his number still in my phone under Andy Health Department. My thumb hovered again. I imagined the chain reaction, an inspection, questions about the preservatives, whispers in the press. I could practically see Mathew's perfect launch night crumbling under the weight of his own shortcuts. Still, a part of me hesitated. This was nuclear. Once I made the call, there was no undoing it. I needed more certainty, more evidence. That weekend, while Mathew was at a tasting meeting, I visited Carterra. The exterior was already wrapped in dark gold signage, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see staff setting up. I slipped inside like I belonged, greeting a distracted contractor who didn't even glance at me. The smell hit first. Rich, savory, but undercut with something faintly chemical. In the kitchen, crates labeled with Italian-sounding brands sat stacked against the wall. I knew enough about supply chains to recognize half of them as bulk distributors, not artisanal producers. And there, by the walk-in fridge, was a plastic tub labeled in small print, Preservativo non dichiarato. Not declared. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Then another of the open sauce jars on the prep counter, all reeking of that artificial truffle scent. My hands were steady now. On my way out, one of the sous chefs looked up from his station. "Hey, you're just here to drop something for Mathew." I cut in smiling and walked away before he could place me. By the time I got home, I knew exactly what I was going to say to Andy. And I knew the exact date the inspection had to happen. I sat at the kitchen table with the photos spread out in front of me like a hand of cards I'd been saving for years. Mathew wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. The house was silent except for the ticking clock above the stove. I dialed Andy's number before I could talk myself out of it. He picked up on the third ring. "Amy Carter?" I haven't heard that name in a while. "Still Amy," I said. "But probably not for much longer." There was a pause, then a careful tone. "What's going on?" I told him. Not everything, just enough. How Mathew's grand opening was set for 2 weeks away. How I discovered undeclared preservatives and imported products passed off as local. How the entire menu was built on a lie. Andy listened without interrupting. Then he sighed. "You're asking me to walk into a buzzsaw." He's got half the city's food writers lined up for that night. "I know," I said, my voice low. "Which is why it has to be that night." Another long silence. I could almost hear him weighing the risk. 7 years ago, I'd pulled his career back from the brink when a rival chef tried to frame him for accepting bribes. Without me, he might have been done. Finally, he said, "Send me everything you have. And Amy, don't talk to anyone about this. Not even your friends." "I don't have friends," I said, almost laughing. "Just a husband who turned me into a ghost." We hung up, and I immediately emailed him the photos and notes. Within 10 minutes, he replied with a single sentence. "Inspection scheduled. Keep your distance." The next few days were strange. I went to work, cooked dinner, and even asked Mathew about the restaurant's progress like a dutiful wife. He bragged about the media RSVPs and casually mentioned that a mystery investor had just signed on. I wanted to ask if she was the same brunette from the postcard, but I bit my tongue. Let him think I was harmless. Meanwhile, Andy sent me short, cryptic updates: securing team, timing confirmed, extra personnel on standby. The night before the opening, Mathew was buzzing like a kid on Christmas Eve. He kept pacing the living room, rehearsing his opening speech. "I just want everything perfect," he said. "It will be," I replied. "One way or another." He didn't notice the edge in my voice. Opening day came with cloudless skies and just enough of a breeze to make the gold banners outside Cartera flutter like they were waving in celebration. Mathew left early, dressed in a perfectly tailored black chef's jacket with his name embroidered in gold. I waited an hour before heading downtown myself, not to the restaurant, but to the coffee shop across the street. From there, I had a perfect view of the entrance. At exactly 6:07 p.m., the first of the health department vehicles pulled up. The inspectors moved quickly, 2 heading inside with clipboards, 1 standing at the door. Guests craned their necks, whispering. A few cameras flashed, but not the kind Mathew had been hoping for. Through the glass, I saw him approach Andy, all charm at first. Then his shoulders stiffened. His hands began to fly in wild gestures. Andy just shook his head and kept talking. Within 15 minutes, guests were leaving. Within 30, the closed by order of the health department sign was taped to the door. I sipped my coffee, watching Mathew run his hands through his hair, pacing on the sidewalk as photographers circled like sharks. For the first time in years, I felt seen. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. His empire might have cracked, but I wasn't done reclaiming myself. By the time I got home that night, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails from reporters, even an email from a food blogger who'd once written a glowing piece about Mathew and me back when we were the dream team. I didn't respond to any of them. At 11:43 p.m., Mathew finally walked through the door. His chef's jacket was wrinkled, his hair flattened on one side like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. He didn't even look at me, just went straight to the kitchen, opened a bottle of whiskey, and poured himself half a glass. "They shut us down," he muttered, like I hadn't just watched the whole thing from across the street. I stayed silent. "They said it's temporary, but..." He sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "This is going to ruin us. The press is already spinning it." One guy from Channel 8 said the words "illegal additives" right to my face. I leaned against the doorway. Were they wrong? His head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means, Mathew, that you built your opening night menu on things you swore you'd never touch. Preservatives. Imports disguised as local. You lied to your investors, your customers." "I did what I had to do," he said, voice rising. "Do you have any idea the pressure I was under? The deadlines? The money on the line? Oh, I have an idea. I've been under that pressure for 10 years. The difference is I didn't get to plaster my name on a building afterward." He stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then he laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I remembered. It was sharp, bitter. "You're enjoying this," he said. I didn't deny it. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Culinary Darling's flagship shuttered on opening night. Photos of Mathew's stunned face outside Cartera were plastered across news feeds. Food writers speculated whether his brand could survive. He spent the day on the phone, alternating between shouting at suppliers and begging investors not to pull out. By evening, half of them had already bailed. I used the quiet to start something I hadn't dared to dream about in years: my own business. It started with a blank legal pad and a pen. I wrote down everything I was good at: marketing, PR, event coordination, brand strategy. Then I circled the industries I actually liked. Food was still there, but on my terms this time. I reached out to 2 small cafe owners I'd met years ago during Mathew's early days. Both remembered me. Both said they could use help growing their customer base. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Mathew was unraveling. The health department's report had gone public, complete with photos of the undeclared additives. Social media tore him apart. Some called him a fraud, others accused him of selling out. One night, I found him sitting in the dark, TV on mute, just staring at the wall. "They're never going to forgive me," he said quietly. I didn't have the heart to tell him forgiveness wasn't the problem. Credibility was. Instead, I said, "Maybe it's time to rethink what you really want. Who you really are." He didn't answer. A week later, I filed for separation. Not with fanfare, not with yelling, just a signature on paper. I left the forms on the kitchen table with a note. We were building something together. You decided to tear it down. I'm just making it official. When I closed the door behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. But I also knew walking away was only part of it. The real victory would be proving, to him and to myself, that I could thrive without being anyone's shadow. 2 months later, the space smelled like fresh paint and coffee beans. It wasn't big, just a corner office above a bakery, but it was mine. On the frosted glass door in clean black lettering, Amy Carter Consulting, Brand Strategy and PR. I ran my fingers over the lettering, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked. For years, my name had been invisible, swallowed by Mathew's spotlight. Now, it was the first thing people saw when they walked in. Business started small. The 2 cafes I'd signed after leaving Mathew were thriving. More customers, better reviews, social media buzzing. They told their friends. Their friends told theirs. Soon I was working with a handful of restaurants, each one a reminder that my skills had value outside of propping up someone else's dream. Mathew, meanwhile, was still in freefall. Cartera never reopened. The investors sued. The lease was terminated, and the health department kept him under monitoring. Rumors said he was thinking of moving to another state to start fresh. The last time I saw him, it was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning. He was buying herbs from a stall, ball cap pulled low like he didn't want to be recognized. We locked eyes for a moment. "You look different," he said. I replied. There was a flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or just the sting of realizing I wasn't the one who had lost everything. In the evenings, I often stayed late at my office, watching the city lights blink on one by one. That's when the quiet would settle in. Not lonely quiet, but the kind that comes when you finally have space to breathe. One night, Andy stopped by with takeout. He looked around, smiling. "Looks like you landed on your feet." "Better than that," I said. "I built my own floor." He laughed and shook his head. "You know, when you called me, I thought it was just about revenge. But looking at this," he gestured to the door, "feels like it was about something bigger." He was right. Taking Mathew down hadn't fixed the years I'd spent invisible. But it had cracked something open in me, a realization that I didn't need to be in the background of anyone's story, least of all my own. The bakery downstairs sent up a warm loaf of bread as a welcome gift the week I officially launched. I sat at my desk, tore off a piece, and thought about the years I'd spent running on empty while Mathew chased glory. This bread wasn't imported. It wasn't laced with chemicals. It was simple, honest, made by someone who cared. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was, too. The restaurant world still buzzed with gossip about Cartera's spectacular collapse, but I didn't linger there. My calendar was full, my work was good, and my own name, was on the door. The kind of ending I used to think only happened for other people had finally happened for me. Not because someone handed it to me, but because, quietly, deliberately, I'd taken it, and I wasn't giving it back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my story, don't forget to like and hit subscribe. You will also enjoy other stories on AJ Family Drama. Until next time, bye.